To begin this morning by quoting from another man's sermon. Oh goodness, I should have written it down. The guy taught at Emory forever. Fred Craddock once preached a sermon on Romans chapter 16 that he began this way. He said, "I hope that you will not feel guilty if your heart is not all aflutter during the reading of this morning's text." It's really funny to preachers, not to congregation. I'm sorry. I think that's very, because I hope that you don't feel really bad that the text this morning did not deeply move you as we heard this long list of names. Strange names. It's kind of a crazy beginning, isn't it? I mean, if you're going to begin a story, don't you need to begin a story well? Don't you need to begin a story something like this, right? Where you start with the planet, right, and then it pans up and the little bitty tiny ship flies by, and then that great big cruiser comes by and it just keeps coming and coming and coming, and you know it's a lost cause. These guys are going to lose, and then C-3PO is going to say, "Oh, they've hit the main reactor. We were doomed," you know. That's how it's got to start. It's got to start with something exciting, something with some pizzazz, something like this, where you've got to, weigh how much sand is in the bag, and is it going to work out? And it doesn't work out well, really, at all, you know. But how many of us don't remember that, right? The great big boulder. In fact, if you look up on YouTube, Indiana Jones, the only scene that they ever do in the mock-ups of the Indiana Jones movies, when a group of teenagers will get together and do that, it's this rock rolling at them. That's all that ever, because it's such a great beginning. And it lets you know from the right out the chute, this is going to be an exciting story, and on the edge of your seat story. It's going to be wonderful. Or if you got a slower story to tell, maybe you begin with something like this. With the coming of the Second World War, many eyes in imprisoned Europe turned hopefully or desperately toward the freedom of the Americas. Lisbon became the great embarkation point, but not everybody could get to Lisbon directly, and so a tortuous, roundabout refugee trail sprang up Paris to Marseille, across the Mediterranean to Oran, and then by train or auto or foot across the rim of Africa to Casablanca in French Morocco. Here, the fortunate ones, through money or influence or luck, might obtain exit visas and security to Lisbon, and from Lisbon to the New World, but the others wait in Casablanca and wait and wait and wait. And you know, from the very beginning, this is going to be a great long movie, you know, but and wonderful, and doesn't that actually capture the very beginning captures the feel of the movie all the way through, the desperation of it, the trappedness, the feeling of claustrophobia. If you're going to begin, you need to begin well. You've got to capture your audience. You know, maybe it's a line like this: "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the most confusing beginning to a book ever." Right? Or maybe "Call me Ishmael." But you got to begin with something that's going to grab hold of the mind and the imagination of your audience so that you can hold them. And the more important the story you have to tell, the more significant this principle becomes. You have to grab them. And if what you have to give them is really, 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 really important, you want to make sure you've got them on pins and needles from word one, right? The biblical, what you don't want to begin is with a reading from the phone book, right? Because that's not likely. You know, if I wanted to tell a story about Hendersonville and it was important, I wouldn't begin, "Now living in Hendersonville, there were the following." You know, you don't start that way. The other biblical writers seem to have gotten this. Right? The other gospel writers, they start out, the Gospel of Mark starts out with this quote from ancient prophecy and then jumps right into the obvious fulfillment of prophecy with the ministry of John the Baptist. And the wonder of this guy and everybody coming out all over the place to get baptized. It's an exciting beginning. Well done, Mark. Right? Or the Gospel of Luke, he starts out with this wonderful exposition to the specific reader, Theophilus, telling him, okay, now I want you to know I've researched really hard so that you can know the things that you believe are true. And then he moves into this fascinating story of a priest walking into the dangerous place, into the holy places of the temple with an offering. And then an angel shows up. Whoa! Now that's exciting, right? Wouldn't you want to keep reading? Well, he's grabbed their attention. Or the Gospel of John, which begins with this really, truly heady beginning. This deep theology. In the beginning was the Word. What? And the Word was with God. Wow, that's neat. And the Word was God. Well, you lost me. What? I got to think about that for a millennia. And then the Word became flesh. Hang on, John. This is fascinating. This is some of the richest incarnation theology we've got. This is wonderful. This is particularly important if you're writing in the ancient world, because that writing was done in scrolls. And in all likelihood, if you wanted to look at a scroll, you'd roll out a little bit and see you at that beginning, and the writer would tell you, now this is what it's about. This is what you're going to be looking at. So the first few words are going to determine whether that guy thinks it's worth rolling this up and keep it unrolling and keep working your way through that. Reading's a lot harder then. Right? You didn't just click a button and flip through and find the table of contents and hit a button and there you are. You had to work at it. So it's important to begin well. And everyone seems to know this but Matthew. What? The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of... And what? A genealogy? Do you know what genealogies have in common? They're dull as paint to everybody but the person who's found it. Have you ever met anybody who's kind of a genealogy hound? And they want to go through and share with you everything about their genealogy. That's like looking at somebody else's vacation slides, right? Really exciting for them. Really fun if you love the people, but for the most part you haven't been there, right? And the genealogy, it's like, wow, you had a Civil War general. Pretty cool. Oh, you're still sharing. Okay. Isn't that what genealogies are like? Long lists of names. We just had one read. Was it compelling? It was very compellingly read, Tom. You have a beautiful voice. And you got all of the names. Very well said, but Matthew, what are you doing? This is not a good beginning, and you have such a good story to tell. Why do you start like this? For so many modern Christians, the book of Matthew begins in verse 18. How many of us even read this thing? Right? But see, that's us. That's us. And for us, this thing does not accomplish what it did for its first hearers. Because for its first hearers, boy, this is some of the most exciting stuff that you get in the gospel. You think Matthew maybe knows the principle of a good beginning? He knows what he's doing. And while for you and I, who are, I won't say you, but for our culture that is largely biblical illiterate, a list of names does next to nothing. For these people who were deeply biblically literate, imagine if you took away the internet, the television, the iPod, the radio, all of these things that we fill up our empty time with, and you put Bible into them. Would you know the story a little better? Well, that's what they are. You're going to put prayer and Bible study into what we fill up an awful lot of our time with. And so for these people, this is not just empty names. For the ancient mind, and particularly for the ancient Hebrew mind, a few words quoted from a story do more than grab those words. For Americans who say we write a term paper or something, before we graduate from college, you write these term papers and you've got a quote. Well, the cogent point that you're trying to make is in the quote itself. It better be. You can't just grab a few words from anywhere in the document you're quoting and throw them in there. But for the ancient mind, just a few words taken from a story grabs the whole story. In fact, a single name can grab a plethora of material. When we say Abraham to you and I, we think of an individual. They don't. They think of several chapters of Genesis. It brings that entire story to the beginning. So if you want to rapidly tell a story shorthand, a genealogy is a great way to do it with their audience. And as this is read aloud, for us, we're going, wow, he said Zerubbabel correctly. Very impressive. But for them, fireworks are going off. It is a rapid succession of amazing stories, and it's settling all of that into them. The other thing that is important is that genealogies are not just kept for everybody. Now, they are now. If you want to, you can go on to, genealogy.com, and you can find out about your roots in Europe or whatever, and find out if you royalty. I have a friend who this backwoods woman in Tennessee who did genealogical work and found out that she was related to the royal family in England, and used those documents to actually get into Windsor Palace and take a walk around and look at the tapestries. And here she is walking around in her scuffed shoes and walking. I'm going, oh my goodness, I would have paid good money to see that. She actually got an audience, I think, with the Queen. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. But that's what anybody can use it. Anybody can do a genealogy nowadays. But that's not what ancient genealogies are for. The minute you run into a genealogy, you know you're dealing with a king. An ancient genealogy establishes a king's right to divine rule. An ancient genealogy is meant to trace this person back and show the nobility of their family and show the connection to a God. This is not just true of Hebrew genealogies. This is true of ancient genealogies. And they had certain expectations of a genealogy. A genealogy is going to be filled with triumphant stories. There are going to be perhaps scoundrels that should find their place in a genealogy, but they're not going to be there. They're going to leave those people out. You're going to have things like telescopic reading, where this person is said to be this person's father. But there might be 10 generations between those two people. They're just not significant generations, so you leave them out. They don't matter. Right? Okay, and there might be ascribing them impossible ages. That's what ancient genealogies did. And all of that was to establish that this person should be king. So at the very beginning of Matthew's gospel, the readers of his gospel knew that what they were reading about was a king. From the very outset of the gospel. Perhaps he knows what he's doing after all. But Matthew is not going to do it right. Matthew is going to tell the wrong story. Oh, it's an ancient story. It has been told for generations. This story has been passed into Matthew's hands. The story of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the story of David, the story of the collapse of the kings is not Matthew's property. It's Israel's property. And we're supposed to tell this a certain way. And if we want to establish nobility of kingship, there are certain stories you tell, and there are certain stories you don't tell. There are several things that we could do with this genealogy. I want to focus in on a single expectation violation that is committed by Matthew, and that is the presence of women. In an ancient genealogy, you didn't put the women in. They didn't matter. And that's not to say that they don't matter. It's to say that in an ancient culture that is patriarchal to its core, the women don't matter. After all, God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not the God of Sarah, Rebekah, and Rachel. And of course, we know better than the ancient cultures. We know that women are created every bit as much in the image of God as men are, and have every bit as much value. But they didn't. They didn't know that. So for a woman to show up in an ancient genealogy is as if we turn on a spotlight and shine it right here. Look at this. Pay attention to this. Notice this. It would have done that to an ancient reader immediately. It wouldn't have been something that they thought, I wonder if I should look into that. It would have been as if that Matthew held up certain stories and said, hey, pay attention here. And the women who are present, incidentally, are not Sarah and Rebekah and Rachel. Those women might have been held up as ancient matriarchal heroes. You might have been able to do that. But that's not who gets highlighted in this text. No, once again, Matthew does it all wrong. Because the women who are going to show up, and because their names appear, the stories with them. Okay, these are the fireworks that are set off by this particular strange genealogy. The women are Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary. Folks, these are not the people that you want paying attention to if you're trying to establish the divine right of your king. If you want to show how wonderful they are, there are certain people that you focus on, and there are certain people that you just kind of sweep under the rug. What Matthew has done is roll back the rug and blow the dust into the air by pulling these people forward. So what do you mean, Ethan? Well, I'm glad that most of our little ones are at children's worship. Let's begin. Tamar. You remember this story? Tamar was Judah's daughter-in-law. She had 2 husbands, and both of them died for unrighteousness' sake. Now, Judah had 3 sons, or he's got a 3rd son here, that he ought to give to Tamar, so that Tamar can raise up children, or rather give Tamar to him, so that Tamar can raise up children in his brother's name. That's why Onan actually got killed. Judah did the right thing. Onan didn't. He refused to get her pregnant and have children in his brother's name because they won't be his children. So he won't do it. Now in the ancient mind, what that would do is preserve the bloodline of that boy. He died without children, and if he has no children, his blood stops. And basically, he ceases to exist as a significant player. So he's got to have children in order to keep going, in order for the promise of God to keep flowing through this family. That's what had to happen. Well, Judah won't do it. He's convinced that, you know what? This woman, there's got to be something wrong with her. She's killing my boys. I'm not giving her another one. I've already given her 2. No way does she get access to another one. So you go live as a widow in your father's house. Not live as a widow in my house. Don't come near me. Don't let me take care of you. I'm going to have no responsibility for you. Get out. Judah is behaving embarrassingly and shamefully in his culture. Now, that honestly would be kind of enough, but the story doesn't stop there. Judah's wife dies. He mourns. As his mourning ends, he's going to go on a journey. Tamar finds out where she's going, and she dresses up in a disguise as a prostitute. And Judah, out of the watchful eye of his family, goes and hires her as prostitute. He gives her his staff and some other things that are tied to him, as a down payment for the sheep he's supposed to give. Is this an embarrassing story? This is a man having relations with his daughter-in-law. It's incest. And she conceives by it, and Perez is in the line that leads to Jesus. This is precisely the kind of story, Matthew, that you sweep under the rug. What are you doing, Matthew? Why bring up Tamar? That is such an embarrassing story. Just bring up Perez and that'll be enough. Let's not do this, okay? No, not okay. No, we're going to shine the light on the embarrassing story. What? Well, it's not just one embarrassing story either. Then there's Rahab. Tamar pretended to be a prostitute. Rahab was one. Rahab was a prostitute. When the spies go into the city to search out Jericho, to see its fort, they stay with Rahab. And Rahab says, look, I'll save your life, you save mine. And they say, fine, put a red cord out of your window, you get all your family in there, and we won't kill the people in there. Well, Rahab gets absorbed into Israel. And in fact, apparently, absorbed into the Davidic line. Do you know that we wouldn't know that from the Old Testament? It never shows up. The story of Rahab and who she is, that shows up. But the fact that Rahab is in the Davidic line, that is an embarrassment for two reasons. She is part of those devoted to destruction. She is a godless pagan, and she is a godless pagan in the godless pagans. She is a prostitute among pagans, an outsider, and she's a prostitute. Yuck! Do we really need to tell this story? Bet you didn't think you were going to be hearing this story when you came to church, huh? Do we need to tell this story? Why are we telling this? And in fact, it had been suppressed. It was so embarrassing to Israel that they didn't tell the story anymore. And apparently it was known because Matthew brings it back. And he throws it in front of them. And he says, in your hero David's line, there was Rahab. Oh, Matthew, what are you doing? And then there's Ruth. And that, oh come on, that's a delightful love story, right? The book of Ruth. It's almost like a fairy tale. It's so beautiful with the great chivalrous hero nobly rescuing the downtrodden, poor, oppressible woman, making sure she's got food and ultimately marrying her. It's a wonderful story. What can be bad about that? Well, yeah, where's Ruth from again? Moab. Do you remember the origins of her people? Lot and his daughters. Lot and his eldest daughter getting their father drunk so that they can have children. Ugh. She is an embarrassment. And though there's an entire book in the Bible dedicated to her, focusing on her in a genealogy, doesn't that seem just a bit strange? Especially since all of this is leading up to David. Can we just talk about David, please? I want a Davidic king, and I want to remember the nobility and the grandeur of David. Okay, well, let's look at David's wife. The text, the Greek text, the best Greek texts, don't even include her name. It's as though Matthew is aware, maybe I've pushed the audience hard enough, huh? By bringing up all those others. So I'll just call her the wife of Uriah. That David has a child by another man's wife. A story of adultery and then intrigue and ultimately murder. Oh, Matthew, give us a break. Can you please just stop? I want greatness. I want nobility. I want honor. You seem to be taking all of it, and as if all of it's not enough, it ends not with Joseph, but with Mary, the teenage mother who's expectant before she gets married. What on earth? Matthew, stories are supposed to begin with what the story's going to be about. And you want us to know that it's about a king. What on earth are you doing? But it's about this king. And keep this in mind. Did you choose your family? Thank you, Susan. Would you choose your family? If you could pick your own family, some of us would pick the ones we got. Many of us would not. I don't know that I would have chosen for my father to have manic depression and alcoholism. I'd rather that wasn't my story. If I could pick my own family, I might try to choose, well, honestly, really rich family. Be pretty nice, wouldn't it? If I were a rich man, wouldn't that'd be all right, huh? Or a famous family, or a powerful family, and certainly a noble family. A family filled with honor. A family filled with dignity and greatness. If I could, before being born, look at them, I'd say, okay, what's going to help me to be a good person? I want to find a family that's as free from sin as possible. But this king chose this family. What do you suppose is going on here? Why is Matthew telling the story this way? Why do this? Why focus on the embarrassment and the sin and the shame? Well, this is not the way other people tell the story. It's worth noting that Matthew is going to stand in harsh contrast with others who will tell this same story. They will focus in on purity. That you must be pure because God is pure. And you must be holy. You must be distinct. And you must be obedient. God has given us the law, and in order to earn God's favor, we must obey. And they would tell the story in such a way that you end up tithing your mint and your dill and your cumin. That you begin to look around you and say, okay, who is not learning from the story? And then you would come up with an entire designation of people and call them sinners. And you would say, I will not eat with sinners. I will not touch sinners. I will not have anything to do with anyone who is not at least as righteous as me. Why? Because that's the story of God. And we must tell the story of God, and we must tell it well and right. Do you see how different what Matthew has done, what Jesus has done by choosing this family? What Jesus is doing by choosing these women and what Matthew is doing by highlighting them is saying there is unacceptability in all of us. These are embarrassing women. They are humiliating. They carry stories of shame and disaster. They are broken. Folks, they are me. Because I carry a story of shame and disaster. I am broken. And if my life and my walk with God is dependent upon me, if I choose to inhabit the Pharisee story, then I might as well walk with the sinners because I am doomed. I cannot fix my story, and I have lived brokenly. Am I alone? Matthew has told this story because Matthew is telling your story. And what Matthew is saying is that no one is unacceptable. No one. Hear the gospel of the God, folks. No one is unacceptable. Are there unacceptable things that we do? Certainly. Have we failed? Yes. Are there depths beyond which we can fall that put us outside of the love of God? Absolutely not. Do you honestly think your life is worse than the incest that we heard about not once, but twice in this story that Jesus chose as His own? No matter how broken you are, Jesus chose to enter into a broken family to tell you, you are welcome, come home. No one is unacceptable. And there are all kinds of unacceptable things that we may have to leave behind. But there is no person who has to be left behind. We are all accepted by God. Not that you don't clean up your life so that you can get acceptable. You clean up your life because you are accepted. That's what the genealogy of Christ is telling you. I have chosen a broken family so that you would know I have chosen you. And I want you for myself. And so there is no one who is beyond His love, not one of us. And He wants to lead us all out of brokenness and back to Himself. So the Christ chooses those who are unacceptable so that you might know He is also choosing you. He wants you, church. He wants you, Christian. He wants you, person who has not yet made a commitment to Christ, to become a Christian. He wants you. He has chosen this story so that He can tell you, I choose you too. You are not beyond my love. The Christ can work in people who have a shameful past so that He might bring about a glorious future. There is none of us who are useless. Not only are we acceptable, but in the Father's hands, He can accomplish great things through us. Not so that I can boast about, look at who I am. No, I will always have the brokenness. But I have an unbroken God who does great things through me, who chose to enter into brokenness and be broken for me, and still maintain His unbreakability and work through broken lives to do great things. That's the kind of God we have, and the genealogy of Jesus Christ makes it clear. The great work of God is not done because of human effort and success. Hear the gospel. If you are carrying the burden of thinking, I've got to get everything right, hear the gospel of the very beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. Who among those people got it right? It is not dependent on your righteousness, but on God's righteousness. And He does great things in spite of and even through human failure. Now, folks, that's not licensed to fail, because failure brings suffering. Sin brings pain, and you don't want it. And He's come to lead you out of it. But don't think, well, I can accomplish this. No, you can't. But God can through you. And the genealogy of Christ makes that clear when you see it as the first people who heard it saw it. So, are you unacceptable? No, you are not. You may have done unacceptable things. You may carry a burden of shame and guilt and pain. And you may feel unacceptable. But the story of Christ comes to tell you that He loves you even in the midst of your brokenness. While we were yet sinners, while we were enemies of the God, Christ died for the ungodly. So do you feel unacceptable? Be welcome. That's what this story says. Are you from a broken family? You're still welcome. No matter how much chaos there surrounds you, you can come to the Christ because He has entered a broken family and knows and understands. And your breaking cannot be worse than this one, can it? And He will still welcome you. He chose to honor them by entering into their family so that He could rescue all of the families of the earth. Are you ashamed of your past? Are you ashamed? Look at Jesus and what He chose to be His past. Is your past more shameful than that? But even if it is equal to that, there is healing in the Christ. He has entered into all of this because He has the power to make broken things whole. So if you look at your past and you think, oh, I can't possibly make this right. Well, no, you can't. Let Him come into your present that He might give you a better future. And let Him transform everything about you. Healing is available and it is absolutely free. Well, no, it's not free. It's just paid for. The cost is paid. It's done. You can be whole. So be welcomed by the Christ this morning, who chose unacceptability and shame so that you would know that you are accepted. Be welcomed by the Christ. If you look into your life this morning and you look at yourself and you say, I am not living an acceptable life, that may be true. I'm not here to say to you that just go ahead and sin. No, that'd be horrible. That's not the gospel. The gospel is this one came and entered into it so that He could lead you out. So if you look into your life and you say, I'm trapped, the one who can free you is among us now. And if you want salvation, it's yours. You could be immersed in water this morning if you're not a Christian. You can take Him on in the watery grave of baptism. He will enter into your heart and transform it, just as He entered into that family and transformed it. You can be different. If you came this morning carrying a burden of shame and pain, and you need the prayers of the saints, folks, we stand ready and wanting to pray for you. If this morning you're subject to the invitation of God, come right now while we stand and sing. Redeemed by the blood